Hi, this is Sheila Stromberg, NITORIOUS, SHE. I am going to be doing a tutorial today on my Skimmer socks pattern. I am going to be releasing a updated version of this pattern that's a little bit improved and just addresses a couple of the issues with the first pattern. So this is what the finished product is going to look like. I'm going to be working this tutorial today in 2 different color yarns. But if you feel intimidated by switching colors, you don't need to feel like you have to do that. You just go ahead and every time I tell you to switch yarns, you'll just stay with the same yarn through the entire work. So that's what the final thing's going to look like. I'm using the super brightly colored yarn today, so hopefully you guys can see everything. It's Hedgehog Fibres Sock Minis. I just picked up a couple of these. They were really cheap, and like, look how cute they are. They're just so bright and fun. So anyways, I'm going to be using 2 of the sock minis to make 1 pair. I have pretty small feet, so you might not be able to get away with it if you have a little bit longer or wider feet. But I will give you yardages in the actual pattern. So I'm going to be using for this pattern 2 pairs of circular needles. So these are size US 1 and US 0. The zeros you can kind of just set aside for now. We won't need them right at the beginning. We won't use them until the very end, the ribbing up at the top of the end. So okay, let's get started. So this is what the pattern looks like right now. This is going to be different than the version that I released, so yours will look a little different, but the instructions are going to be the same. So make sure you look through the whole pattern before you get started. As always. So my first little tip is when I am working up a pattern, I like these little legal flags. You just get them at the dollar store in their stationery section, and I just like put it on the pattern wherever I'm at in the pattern, so that I know what is the next line, like that. And it kind of helps keep track. It's really good for charts too. So give it a try if you can find some at your dollar store. Okay, so we're gonna get started. This is a toe up pattern, which I really like when you're using kind of a small amount of yarn, because you can kind of see as you go how things are fitting a little bit easier than when you're doing like a cuff down pattern. I suppose it doesn't matter too much for a short pattern like this. We're really only getting the minimum fabric possible to cover your feet, but when I'm doing a full-length sock, I like to have that. So okay, so let's get started. So the first thing that I'm going to go over is a technique called Judy's Magic Cast On. This cast on is really awesome for a provisional cast on. It's great for the toes of socks. So if you look, like you can't tell where it was at all. There's no like weirdness or seam or whatever. So it's really good for that. So okay, basically what you're going to do is you're going to hold your cable needle with the 2 needles together like this. You're going to take your yarn. So the normal way when we're doing like a long tail cast on, we lay it with the tail going over this side, but we're actually going to go in between the 2 needles and pull the tail off, coming to the back of the work like that. Okay, so then leave yourself a little bit of a yarn tail. You'll have it over 1 needle, not the other. And then I just grab onto it like for a long tail cast on, and I actually, when I'm doing socks, I wrap it around my pinky because the yarn is so thin it kind of pulls through my fingers a little bit faster, so that way I have a little more tension. So we have 1 stitch cast on 1 needle. We're going to be casting on 16 stitches altogether, which is going to be 8 on each needle. Okay, so what you're going to do is you're going to hold your yarn like you normally do, kind of a slingshot, and then what we're going to do is we're going to take this back yarn, we're going to bring it up to the front and go in between the 2 needles like that. So that's, now we have 1 stitch on each needle. That's 2 stitches. Then we're going to take the yarn that's at the front and bring it around the back of the needles, bring it up over and in between. So that's now 3. Do the same thing. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. And so then you should have a little bit of a tail still. You'll need a little tail to weave in the ends, so make sure it's not like super short or anything. Then I always double count my stitches here to just make sure. So we should have 8 on each. 2, 4, 6, 8, 2, 4, 6, 8. So this is one thing actually that I changed in the pattern is the stitch count as we cast on. A lot of people on the bigger sizes said that the stitch cast or the cast on stitches was just a little bit too small. So make sure you check your pattern. I'm working the smallest size, so I only have 16 stitches. If you're working a larger size, you'll have more stitches on each needle. Sorry, I should tell you what I was doing. So then one thing I like to do is I just tie a little slip knot in the end, and it kind of keeps the first stitch snug. I don't really like that it gets all leggy, so I just tie a little slip knot there, and make sure you make it so you can pull it out at the end of the work. You don't want this sitting around at the end. Okay, so that's what your needle should look like. Now this is going to be the first needle we work on, and we're going to get started straight in the round. So we'll take that and kind of turn it sideways, and we're just going to be using the magic loop method after this. So you'll work across these and then across those, and that's going to make a circle. Okay, so the first round, all we're doing is knitting across this top set of stitches like this. Okay. Now when we get to the second one, there's only one little hiccup with Judy's Magic Cast On, and I'll show you guys what it is. So let's get that out of the way. So when you work the first stitch, just go ahead and knit into it normally. Now if you look at the stitches, if you've knit very much, you'll recognize this stitch is actually twisted. So we're, instead of knitting into the front like we normally do, we're actually going to knit into the back loop, and that'll just correct the twisted stitches. Work the rest of this row all in the back loop. If you knit that first one through the back loop, it kind of leaves a hole that I don't like, so I just knit that one through the front loop. So that'll untwist all the stitches, and then you're ready to just go like normal. Okay, so that's our plain knit round. Now row number 2 is going to be an increase row. So we'll go ahead and move the stitches back over to here. Okay, so the increase row is going to be worked. We knit one, and then we're going to do a make one. So if you have never done a make one, it's really not too hard. There's a little length of yarn that runs between the 2 stitches, like that. We're just going to take that and stick it up on the needle. So what I'm doing here is actually a make one left, and then if you do it this direction, that's a make one right, and you knit into the front on a make one right. If you're doing a make one left, you knit into the back. It doesn't really matter if you do a make one right or a make one left on this pattern. Some patterns does matter, but on this one it doesn't really, as long as you do them all the same. If you switch in back and forth between making one, it's going to look weird. So just make sure you do them all the same. So I'll show you as a make one right. I'll do make one lefts on the first increase and make one right on the second, but you can do them all as make one left or make one right, or you can switch them like I'm doing. Okay, and then we knit the last stitch. So we should have knit one, increase by a make one, and then the same amount of stitches in between, and we'll go and do the second needle the exact same as we've done the first one. So we'll knit one. I'm making one left. Knit to the last stitch. And then we're going to make one more. And I'm making it as a make one right. And then knit one. Okay, this is the beginning of the round now. And so, okay, now all you're going to do is alternate round 1 and round 2. So knitting all the stitches and then working an increase round until you have the stitch count listed on your pattern. So make sure you go check the pattern. This is going to complete the toe of the pattern. Okay, so at this point I have just finished completing all of my increase rows. I now have 24 stitches on each of my needles. Make sure that your stitch count matches what's in the pattern. So the next thing that we're going to do is just work straight stockinette stitch, which is just knitting every round. And we're going to work that until we've reached as long as we want our toe to be. So you can see that I changed colors. After I completed the last increase row on these ones, I'm going to work an additional 4 rows in this toe color. I don't really like to start this color switch right after the last increased row. I feel like it looks a little bit too like abrupt for what I like, but you can change how fast you change colors if you want to. I'm going to work 4 more rows in this color, and then I'm going to switch and work until the toe measures the length indicated on the pattern, which for my sock is going to be 2 1/4 inch long. So just make sure you check the pattern for the length that you want. And you can keep track of how many rows you've worked if you're a perfectionist and you want them to be the exact same. I usually just measure. I don't really count my rows, but I know a lot of people, it bugs them if there's like 1 row off. One thing that you'll also notice is that I have added a marker to indicate the beginning of the round. Over here, at a certain point when you're working your toe along, it's going to get where it's not easy for you to tell where the beginning of the round was. So just go ahead and throw a locking stitch marker in the side. And I just kind of scoot it up every inch or so. I move it up so I can just easily find my beginning of the round. And I don't have to be worrying about slipping the marker on the actual needles because I kind of tend to lose them that way. So yeah, okay, so go ahead and work to the length that it tells you on your pattern at this point. All right, I am at the point where I need to switch yarn. I have worked 4 additional rows after my last increased row on the toe. So I'm gonna just switch to my main color yarn. So make sure you leave, you know, a good couple inches to weave in your ends. I leave about, what is that, like 5 inches. So then what I do is I take the yarn that I'm switching to and I make sure that they're about the same length and then bring them down together. And then I just tie a little slip knot. Again, this keeps the yarn snug after the switch so that it's not getting all, it gets all like leggy and weird if you don't like have it tied together a little bit. So I just go ahead and then scooch the slip knot out of the way. And then we're just going to continue on straight until the toe is going to measure the length that we want it, which for my size is 2 inches and 1/4. All right, at this point, we are going to stop working in the round and just work on the bottom of the insole stitches. So what we're going to do is we're going to get ready to work. Go ahead and knit 2 stitches. Okay, after I've worked these 2, I find it easier to actually slip them over to the end of the round like that so that I can just kind of set that needle down. Now you're going to need a stitch holder, or if you do not have any stitch holders, you can just use a piece of waste yarn and just put a tapestry needle on the end of it and string it through instead. So I'm going to just slip. So check your pattern. My size needs to slip 20 stitches to the stitch holder. Basically, what you're going to do is just slip until 2 stitches remain on this needle, basically. So that we even the stitch count up from the 2 that we slipped over at the beginning of the round. All right, once you have your stitches slipped over, so there's only 2 left, close your stitch holder. I like to slide the stitches, actually, oops. I slide them to the other side because I feel like sometimes they kind of slide off and get stuck down in here. So then we're going to have 2 stitches left. We're going to just move them over also. So all of our stitches are just together on the bottom side of the work. So now we are going to stop working in the round. These stitches are just going to stay on hold. They're the stitches up here at the toe. And we're going to use them again when we come to the ribbing. But for now, we're just going to ignore them. Oops, there we go. Okay, so working in the turned rows is really easy. We just slip 1 stitch. And I slip it purlwise with the yarn in front on the wrong side, and then just work to the end of the row. You can see where my color changes. I just stuff it in the end of the toe when it starts to come out. Okie dokie. When we get all the way over to the end, we're just going to turn the work around. Then I slip one. Again, I slip purlwise. It doesn't actually matter if you slip knitwise or purlwise when we're going to be picking up stitches through here, because you're not going to see it. We're going to be picking up, so that's actually going to go on the inside of the work. But I like, for consistency's sake, to do them all the same. I just do them purlwise with the yarn at the wrong side of the work. And then they just, I mean, you're not even really going to see them, so it's not the end of the world if you forget and slip it another way, but I just do them all the same. So go ahead and just knit to the end of the row, and then that's what we're going to do until the sock measures about 3 inches less than what the actual foot length is. And then we're going to just work a little bit of increases on here. This is another thing that I changed in the pattern for the, I kind of wanted it to have a little rise here. So that it stays in your shoe. Mine kind of slips down if it doesn't have a little increase here. So we're going to just work straight until we get to the area that we need to increase. So check your pattern, but it's just going to be 3 inches less than what your actual foot length is. All right, so at this point, your work should be about 3 inches less than you want your length to be. So mine is just 5 1/4 inch long. So now we're going to work just a little bit of a gusset, and that's going to help to add that length at the back of the heel so that it stays up in your shoe and doesn't give you a blister on the back of your foot. Okay, so the gusset row is pretty easy. So you're going to work just a plain wrong side row, slip one, purl to the end. Then we're going to slip one, knit one, and now we're going to make one just like we did before. So I'm going to make one left, and again, it doesn't really matter as long as you do all in that side the same. Knit until just 2 stitches are left on your needles. All right, so when just 2 stitches remain, you're going to make one again. And again, you can make it right, left. I'm going to do it right on this side. And then just knit to the end. Then the wrong side will just slip and purl as we've been doing. So we're just going to work until there are 5 decrease or increase rows total worked over here. So we'll just repeat that sequence of the wrong side and the right side row. Just 4 more times, and then at the end of working those increased rows, make sure you count your stitches and ensure that it's the same stitch count that I have listed in the gusset section of the pattern, because the stitch count will be off if you don't have the exact right amount for the rest of the heel, and that's really the only important time for your stitch count really in the whole pattern is on turning the heel, or else all the numbers are not going to line up. So just make sure that you go and check that. All right, I've just finished working my gusset increase rows. So at this point, make sure you count your stitches and double check that it's right in the pattern. Okay, so we're moving on to the section that's called turning the heel. This is the part that probably if you are new to knitting socks, especially from the toe up, that this might throw you a little bit. So I'm going to go over the whole section. So the first thing that we're going to do is put a marker in the middle of the heel stitches. I will put the stitch count in the pattern, so just count over the number of stitches and put the marker here, and you should have the same amount of stitches on both sides of the marker. So at this point, if you are going to switch yarn colors again for the heel, you're going to go ahead and do that. I actually left on the sample the yarn I used for the sole. I left it attached because I'm very lazy about weaving in ends. So if you do not want to weave in a couple extra ends, then just leave your yarn attached like that. If it's getting in the way and it's too annoying for you, go ahead and cut it, and then we'll join it back up again in a minute. Okay, so when I am joining another color, sometimes I just do a little slip knot and stick it on the needle. like that. And that's going to keep it so you can tension it. Okay, so here we're going to get going on the turning the heel. So the first thing we're going to do is just knit over to the marker that we have there. That's going to be the center of the heel. We're going to call that marker the center of the heel at this point. So sometimes when I am using really small needles, I really don't like these locking stitch markers to be like leaving the work as I'm working rows because they're humongous when you're working socks. So I'm going to actually switch to a little tiny stitch marker. Just take that one out that just showed us where to knit over to, and I'll stick the little one in. Okay, so we have knit over to the center marker. Now we're going to knit an additional 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, now we're going to knit the front and the back. This is just an increase, so we'll knit here and then come around behind and knit the back there. Okay, so your stitch should look like that, and then slide it off the needles. We're going to knit one more, and we're going to wrap and turn. So if you've never wrapped and turned, it's not too hard. Basically what you do is you take the yarn from whichever side of the fabric that your yarn should be at for the next stitch. So the next one I'm going to be doing is knit. So instead of leaving it at the back of the work where we normally would have it, we'll bring it to the opposite side, slide that stitch over, and then bring it back to the back. And then slide it back over, and then turn. So you can see, since we're using 2 colors yarn, you can see how nicely it just kind of wraps around. If you have a different wrap and turn short row method that you prefer, you can go ahead and use that. I'm just using the basic one. So now we turn the work, and we're going to be working the next row is to just purl 19. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and that gets us back to the center. 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. Okay, now we are going to purl the front, purl the back, purl one more, and then we're going to wrap and turn. So on a purl side, we'll bring the yarn over to the back, slip the stitch over, bring the yarn back up to the front, slip it back over, and turn. So there's the wrap stitch there. All right, now the next row, we're going to knit over 17, and then we're going to knit the front and the back again, knit one, and then we'll wrap and turn again. So bring the yarn to the opposite side, slide the stitch over, bring the yarn back, slide the stitch back, and turn. So basically what we're doing is kind of just working a littler section of yarn in between each wrap. So we'll work smaller, 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 and that's going to kind of shape the back of the heel for us. So now purl 15. Okay, and then we'll just purl the front, purl the back, purl one, wrap and turn. So on this section, when I am turning a heel, I try to have enough time to sit down and do it all in one go. It's just a little bit easier than trying to pick your work up and figure out where you were at in the work. I find it's a really big hassle. So see, like I just lost count. So I can go from the wrap, I can see kind of there's a gap in between them. So I go from the wrap, and then how many have I knit? 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 13. And then we'll knit the front and the back. Knit 1, wrap and turn. And we're going to go back 11. Purl the front and the back. Purl 1, wrap and turn. Now we'll go back 9. Knit the front and the back. Knit 1, wrap and turn. Now we'll just do purl 7. Oops. Purl the front and back. Purl 1, wrap and turn. And with more practice, this section is going to make a little bit more sense than it makes right now. The first few times that you follow it, you're going to kind of just be following blindly. And that's really, really normal for the first several socks that you make. So if you don't understand what's happening, just blindly follow it and you'll be just fine. Okay, so now we're going to knit all the way to the end of the needle. And we're just going to leave this marker here because we're going to need it again later. So just keep slipping it up. So I'm going to show you how to work a wrap together on a knit side. So what we're going to do is I like to slide the needle over to the right hand needle, and then I go into the wrap with my left hand needle and then just slide that back over. And then I knit those two together. You just are going to work them together like that so your stitch count doesn't increase. Then I kind of, give them a little pull, and it kind of makes it sit a little nicer. Knit to the next wrap, and you can tell if you look at it where the wraps are, you can see this gap in between them. So when you see that gap, you know there's a wrap that you need to pick up. Just slide it up, and I slide them back over together. Knit those together. Go to the next wrap. Knit them together. We should just have one left. And knit that together. Now we're just going to knit to the end of the needle. And the following row, I'll turn it. On the following row, we're going to purl back to all the way to the end of the row and work any of the purl side wraps together. I'll show you guys how to do that in a second. So if you're working short rows and you do not work the wrap together, you're going to get a big hole in your work. So make sure you don't skip over that. If it's a little bit tricky, it's hard the first few times you do it. And the first few times you do it, you might work your wrap really tight. If you pull the yarn really tight, like when you wrap the stitch and then work the next stitch, it's so much harder to get into. So try to wrap them kind of loose, or you're going to be fighting with your work later on. But it's not impossible, but it is harder the tighter that you work them. So I try to leave them a little bit loose. Okay, so we'll work over to where we can see that first gap. You can see. So when we get there, it's a little harder on purl sides. You can see the wrap here. So what I like to do is I kind of turn my work down like this, get the wrap on the right side because I find it a lot easier to see it on that side. And then I take that wrap and stick it up on the left-hand needle, then purl those two together. And I don't think that's how everybody does it, but that's the way I find it easiest. So I just flip it down, bring it up, and then purl them together. I think there's another way to do it, but I always seem to get twisted if I do it a different way, so I just do it like this. Make sure you don't split your yarn like I just did. Alright, that's the last wrap. And then we just purl to the end of the row. And at the end of the row is where you can see I have kind of a little bit of weirdness going on because I tied a slip knot onto that end. So I just kind of undo it when I get over here. And sometimes I'll take these, if this is a cut end, and I'll tie them into a little slip knot together. But if you're leaving it live, you can just wrap this around and tie it as a slip knot like that. Don't tie it too tight or this will pull and the stitches will get weird shaped. Alright, now we're ready to work a right side row again. Let's switch where I'm at. Okay, so now we'll just slip one, knit to the center marker to start. So this next part that we're doing is going to make a heel flap, and the first few rows of it is going to be like very confusing if you haven't done toe-up socks before, but just make sure you count your stitches, follow the stitch count exactly, and you'll start to get the hang of it and see what's going on in just a minute. Okay, so we knit to the marker. Now we're going to knit to a certain number past the marker. So check your pattern. Mine is 11, so I'm going to work 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Now we're going to do a slip, slip, knit. Oh, I do mine a little weird also, by the way. So most people do slip, slip, knit. I do it like that, which makes it kind of sit better, but you can do a regular slip, slip, knit is fine. Okay, so after you work that, we're just going to turn it. Oops, look, see how I told you it was going to get annoying? Now it is. All right, now we're going to just slip the first one here. We're going to purl back to the center marker. Okay, once we're at the center marker, we're going to purl 11 more. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Okay, now we're just going to purl 2 together and turn it back again. Oh, see how annoying this gets? You can switch to straight needles if it gets all tangled up like this, if you want. Okay, so now we're gonna do row 13. We're gonna slip one, knit one, and we'll repeat that until you have done 10 stitches from my side. Check your size, and make sure your stitch count is right, but mine is gonna be 10 after the marker. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Okay, so then when you get to that point, there should be one left to slip before your gap. Slip one, and then we'll slip, slip, knit. Like that. And now we'll turn, and then you're just gonna basically be working back and forth in either, you know, purl on the wrong sides, and on the right sides you're just slip one, knit one, slip one, knit one, until you get over to that gap that we just saw. I'll show you it on the wrong side so you can see. You'll be able to, after you've worked a couple rows, you'll be able to see where that gap is happening. It'll start to kind of turn up a little bit, and then you can really see it a lot better. Okay. And if you're not sure what that's happened, just make sure you keep counting the stitches over. Then you'll just work the 2 together. On this side it'll be a purl 2 together. And then you'll go back to slip one, knit one on this side, and then work a slip, slip, knit. And you're going to just continue to repeat this sequence of rows until you have worked all of the extra stitches outside of the gap of the decrease. So I'll show you what I mean in just a second. Okay, so when I get here, this is always going to be slip, slip, knit. So on the last row, there won't be any left on the left-hand needle on both sides. So you'll have to be finished right after a wrong side row. So just continue to repeat those 2 rows, 12 and 13, until there's no extra stitches on the other side of the gap. And then we will start working on the ribbing. So I have just completed the heel. At this point, again, you can count your stitches to make sure that you have the same number of stitches. It's not super important at this point, to be honest, if your stitch count is off 1 or 2 stitches. But if you want to, you can go ahead and count it. At this point on my other sample, I switched the yarn again. So if you remember, I left it attached here. I'm going to show you on this side of the work. We're going to get started working on it, and you can break this heel color yarn at this point if you want, or if you're lazy like me, I just leave it set there because we're going to come back and use it again on the top part up here. So I go ahead and grab this main body yarn, and then I just will knit like 2 stitches like that. Then I turn the work around and make sure that they're not pulled super tight, because if you pull them really tight, this little stretchy yarn here, it's gonna get like all squashed up, and you don't want that. So I kind of stretch it out like that, and then turn the work back and continue. And if at this point, like you've pulled this really tight, retension this, loosen it back up. So if that looks good, then I'll go ahead and carry on. We're going to just knit to the little center stitch here. Okay, at this point, usually I will take this marker out and switch back to a locking marker, because I lose these if I'm working at regular in the round. And I just mark the stitch underneath, and just remember between these 2 needles is where my beginning of the round is. So now we're going to switch to our small needles. So we're going to just knit to the end of the heel first. All right, once you get to that point, we're going to pick up down the body of the work here. So a lot of people, when they pick up stitches, they will pick up through both of these loops like that. And my feet are like really sensitive to seams or something, because that just bugs me. So I actually pick up a little different than most people. I just pick up through the first loop there, and that's going to make it feel really seamless. And then just pick up in each of the slip stitch. And again, I'm just picking up. So if you look at it vertically, you can see both legs of the stitches. I just pick up through one of them. And so the way you slipped doesn't really, visibly you can't see it on the outside of the work. So, you know, everyone should look the same after this. So you just pick up 1 stitch in each of these row end slip stitches all the way down until we get back to our little stitch holder over there, or yarn if you used waste yarn. Oops. Sometimes if I don't have a stitch holder handy, I'll just use a spare circular needle. If I have like a really short one, I'll just stick the stitches on there. It's really handy if you're working like a sweater sleeve or something like that. Okay, once we get all the way back down, I like to pick up just kind of 1 in this little corner here so that there's not a hole. All right, then let's just slide the cable through. And then I put my held stitches. I just like to stick them back on the size 1 needles here. Okay. And then we're done with that. All right, pick your working needles back up. And then you're just going to knit these onto the smaller needle here. And when we get back over to the end, we'll just do the same thing that we did on the first side. I like to pick up one in the little corner. Again, I do it through a single leg of the stitch. Now then on this side, I pick up this outside one again, like that. And we kind of want this ribbing here to be kind of snug. If it's not, oh, look at that, it's a split yarn. Isn't that just terrible? I'm not fixing it now. We want this ribbing to be kind of snug because that's what's going to kind of keep it up in your shoe. I really hate when they just are sliding down all day. You know what I'm talking about. And it's just like all day long, it's rubbing your ankle and it's sliding down. You can't even fix it. It's just so annoying. So I liked it kind of a really small ribbing here. So I'm using the size 0 needles to keep it just really nice and snug. And then you might be tempted when you do your bind off to do a stretchy bind off. I find that that is actually not the best idea on these because we do want that bind off to be a little tighter. Just going to keep them snug. It won't feel uncomfortable on your feet, but it's going to help keep them nice and snug when you wear them and not sliding around all over the place. Okay, now I'm back up to my held stitches. Well, I guess they're not held stitches. To the live stitches, and I'm just gonna pull them back up here and then just knit to the beginning of the round. Oops. Okay. Oops. All right, get rid of that one. Okay, now at this point, I like to put the little bend for my magic loop right in the middle of the toe, like that. If you're working on really small circular needles, and you don't really need to worry about that too much, but if you're doing the magic loop, as I am, you'll need to have a turning point. Okay, so now we're just going to work row 1, which is just knit 1, purl 1, ribbing through the row. And this is where if your stitch count for picking up, you can go around and count your stitches and ensure that you're picking up an even number, but honestly, I don't really do that on these. If I have a leftover stitch at the end of the round, I just work the last stitch as a purl 2 together. Instead of kind of increasing to compensate for not stitch count in this pattern, I like to decrease because then you're gonna have it a little bit tighter, and we do want the ribbing snug, so just decrease 1 if you need to. All right. My skein is getting small, but I think I'm gonna make it all right. It's kind of hard to tell if you're gonna have enough yarn on one of these teeny little hanks of yarn, but they're just so cute. Like, how can you not? I just bought like 4 of them. I should have just bought 1 skein of yarn, but I didn't. I had to have all the colors. Okay, so when we get to the end, I do have one leftover stitch. You'll know by if you purl the last, what is supposed to be last stitch, and you have one left over. So if you get to this point and it's ought to be a purl stitch, I just purl those two together. Whoops. Like that. Okay. Now we're just going to work one more knit one, purl one round. Oh no, sorry. You'll work two more knit one, purl one rounds. I'm gonna pause this video and you guys can pause it and then catch up. All right, you should just have completed the third round of ribbing, and we are ready now to work round three, sorry. We're gonna work a little short row section to just give the work a little bit added height and give you a little more padding in the back of your shoe. This is round 3, so we'll just do knit 1, purl 1, and now we're gonna repeat that 5 times. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So at this point you should have 12 stitches past your center marker there. We're going to go ahead and wrap and turn, and then we're going to work back and knit 1, purl 1, ribbing, just to maintain the pattern of ribbing that we already established. Work it back to the center marker. And then we'll work another 12 past. So just knit 1, purl 1, ribbing. Okay. Now we should just be able to wrap and turn. Work back to the center marker. And then this time we're just going to work to 8 past the center marker. Oops. And then we'll just wrap and turn and do the same thing, work to 8 past the center marker. And then we'll wrap and turn. Okay. Then I just work back to the beginning of the round. Okay, and I like to continue with this color yarn for the following row, and then I'm going to switch. So just work this round in the established ribbing, and when you come to your wraps, you're going to work them together. So it's easier on these knit stitches. We'll work them as we did before. The purl stitches, like picking it up on, like kind of backwards on these, is a little hairy, so I'm going to show you guys how I do it. And again, if you have another method that you like, you are welcome to use that. I've tried a bunch of other short row methods, but I just don't like any of them. So I just stick with this one. But you know, I've heard German short rows are really good, but I've not tried them yet. But I need to, because this wrap and turn, it's good, But picking up a wrap on kind of like we're doing it kind of the opposite side, it's a little annoying. So maybe there's a better method. I've tried a bunch of different ones, and I think this one works really well to close all the gaps and stuff so that it looks nice and tidy. Some of the other ones I've tried are just, I don't know, overly confusing. I don't know. And this one is really straightforward. I have a hard time like reading those kind of things and knowing what it means. It's easier for me if somebody can sit down and show it to me. So you'll know when you get to that wrapped stitch because it's gonna have a gap like it did on the heel section. Okay, so now we have this wrap stitch, and the wrap is right there. So I do it like this. I stick my needle up from the bottom and then slide them both over to my right hand needle, and see how tight I did that. That was very bad. Then I just go back in it and slide it back over that way and then purl them together. I'll show you it again on this next one. So I take it up from the bottom, slide them over together, and then slide them back like that. And then purl them together. And then work to the end of the round. It's not too bad because there's only 2 of them, but it sure isn't. I feel like there's a better way, but I need to try around with some different methods. Okay, we should look like this at this point. And now if you are using 2 colors, I went ahead and finally cut that yarn. Now on this side, oh, I thought I was gonna have it over here. Boo. Okay, here's what we're gonna do. This pains me. I'm gonna cut it and add it back over here. I did this a little different on the second sock than I did on the first. I made the beginning of the round over here. So I can't be as lazy, I guess, over here. So we'll just tie these 2 together. And then I'm just going to carry on with the knit 1 purl 1 ribbing. And I am going to work it until it reaches 1/2 of an inch. If you want it shorter, like for a lower profile one, you can just bind off now. If you want it longer, you can go ahead and do that too. But if you are increasing it longer than about 1/2 an inch, I would throw a couple of decreases in the corner here. I would just work that as a knit 2 together. And then at the other end of the toe, work that as a slip knit on every other row, or else it's gonna get a little too wide around the bottom. Okay. I will pick it back up when we bind off. All right, all we have left is just a little bind off on the end here. I've already done the majority of the sock. This is just worked with a traditional bind off, so just knit 1, pull the extra stitch over, knit 1, pull the extra stitch over. I liked to do this kind of a little tighter than I might normally do a sock bind off, because it does help it kind of snug together a little bit and stay on my foot a little bit better. But if you are really sensitive to, you know, bind offs on your feet, you can do this a little bit looser, or you could do a stretchy bind off. I just found this helps it stay kind of up in my sock a little bit, or my shoe a little bit better than it would. Oops. Without it, I tried it both ways, with a stretchy bind off and a regular bind off, and it seemed to stay a little bit better, and it didn't bother my feet as being uncomfortable or anything. So that's really all there is to it. After I bind off, I just soak it for a minute and then squeeze out the water and roll it up in a towel and just squeeze out as much water as I can, and then I just lay it on a nice flat surface and let it dry. You know, you can chuck it in the washing machine, but I usually leave mine flat to dry if it's a machine washable yarn. All right, so I get to break, and then I make sure that I don't weave in my ends till after I've soaked it the first time, because I find that sometimes if you weave in the ends before, it makes the work lay a little bit different. So that's the finished product. That's all there is to it. Have fun with colors. Have fun with, you know, customizing it to fit your foot perfectly. All right, I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial.